Welcome to the Developing Your Football World podcast at British Football Coaches Network. This episode's guest is Johnny McKinstry, who talks to us about transitioning into international management, coaching for Sierra Leone, Rwanda and Uganda, and also club positions in Lithuania and Bangladesh. Enjoy. Johnny, thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thanks. Yeah, no, it's great to be here, and looking forward to having a good chat.
Well, it's going to be really interesting to talk to you because I've followed you for a long time, and I'm sure a lot of people listening will be familiar with you because, as I said to you before, a lot of coaches do like to live vicariously through others, and you and your career would be a standout example to a lot of people who want to go and work abroad and who want to work at the levels you've worked at. So it's really, really interesting to talk to you today, and it will be a lot of use to many aspiring coaches. You're quite young yourself, aren't you? And you've done a lot for someone of your age.
Yeah, definitely. I think sometimes I have to remind myself of that. You know, I've probably got a few more grey hairs than most people my age. It seems like I feel a lot older, but I do have to remind myself I'm only 36. But it's been sort of 20 years in the game, you know, and 20 years in football from grassroots through the senior level is, you know, in some ways it seems like 20 years packed into 1 year, but in other ways it seems like 40 years. So, yeah, it's young, but, you know, I definitely feel older than my years many days.
Before we go into your career, looking at it through chronologically, I would like to ask a question about that because you took on the national team job at Sierra Leone at 27, is that right?
Yep, that's correct.
Now, being fairly young in such a important role, have you ever felt that it has been a barrier for you?
I think in the early years of my sort of move into the professional game, it was definitely something that came up regularly. It doesn't come up anymore. It's never something that's asked in interviews anymore. But definitely, probably, I obviously was the Sierra Leone coach and then the Rwanda coach, and then I moved into club football. But probably my first three roles, still the age factor was a factor in clubs and associations making a decision, and in fact missed out on a couple of really, you know, roles that I was really interested in, and the feedback was we just felt we needed to go for someone older, which can sometimes be galling when you see that maybe your track record is, from my perspective anyway, more significant and more firm than some other people who get the roles, and that the reason is that they feel, you know, when you're 32 maybe at the time, that they'd rather go for the 40-year-old coach than the 32-year-old coach because they think you being the same age as the players would be a problem, which is interesting because it doesn't reflect then that the success we had in previous roles it clearly wasn't a problem because we gained success and improvement in them. So yeah, it definitely, for the first sort of, I would say, 5 years of my career in the pro game, it was something that was always there. Whereas definitely now, even though I'm still probably one of the younger people that clubs or associations are talking to about positions, it's not something that comes up anymore because they look at 10 years now in the pro game and, you know, the age just sort of disappears.
I think sure it was Pete Sturgis who talked about this a lot, where as someone who is getting towards the advanced years, he's still able to relate to players because he stays fairly modern, and a lot of experienced coaches, maybe in their 50s and 60s, are still really good at relating to young players because they've kept up with what's going on. They can speak the same language as the kids. And so I think, to add to what you're saying, a lot of it is it's a mentality thing. If you are able to relate to players, it doesn't matter what age you are, but it seems like a strange stigma. And I know from my own experience that parents and players suddenly gave me a lot more respect when I got grey hair and started to look like I was 40. It was kind of unwarranted. So
yeah, well, I'm told I look 10 years older with a beard now, so maybe that will add to that gravitas. Definitely, I'm told when I'm clean shaven, I look a lot younger.
Oh yeah. Now let's go right to the start. what were your first steps into coaching?
Well, same as a lot of people probably listening in terms of grassroots game. I was sort of a very just a normal run-of-the-mill sort of player growing up in Ireland. But in my head, I always, football, and not just football, sport in general, but football in particular, just captivated me. And, I used to go every week and watch Irish League football. And, so probably by the time I was 16, I'd racked up maybe 400 or 500 games as a spectator in the stands watching a live football, which, is just irreplaceable, really. It's, as you know, it's completely different than watching games on the TV. And so for me, I got to that stage where it was obvious that I wasn't going to have a career as a pro player. But I don't know, even growing up playing for the teams I played with, I always had an opinion, basically. I was probably the player that a lot of youth coaches hated because, even at 15 or 16, had an opinion about where I should be playing or where, Joe should be playing or where Jimmy should be playing or whatever it was. At 15, 16, I was already having those opinions because I clearly, without knowing it, had a tactical understanding of the game. And yeah, it was just a case of, okay, how do you get involved in this? And at 16, going and doing your basic coaching badges. Back then, they called the Mini Soccer Leaders Award and the Junior Team Managers Award. So predating level 1 and level 2. I went and did those, and you start coaching, the local, I don't know, it was like an under-9s team I got involved in a couple of nights a week, as well as when I was still playing and still at school, and then coaching the mini soccer centres around Northern Ireland and the summer camps. And, at that stage, it's just, it's great because you're getting a bit of money for coaching kids. And really, it just took off from there. I really enjoyed it. Obviously, people asked me to come back, so I must have been doing something right. And yeah, just really, it took off from there. For me, I really enjoyed it. I was able to earn a bit of money doing it. And it was just really progressive from there.
The thing about football coaching is it was never on the careers advice or the guidance council at school. And yet now it's actually becoming a viable career. There's so many opportunities. And it's good to see a lot of colleges now starting to include BTECs. And I wonder, what would we have done if they'd actually had something more specific like that when I first started? But so your first role abroad, was that working for the Red Bulls?
Yeah, so I'd moved from Ireland, just sort of to step back a couple of years. I'd moved from Ireland over to England to go to university. And so whilst I was at university, if you can consider that overseas for me anyway, sort of working, for Newcastle United's football in the community, coaching a local under-16s team, coaching the university team, who we went on and won the British sort of universities championships with. And, so again, coaching all my age mates. So this idea, for me, of coaching people the same age as you started when I was 20, because I was coaching the university team, and people who I was in class with, I was then coaching in the evenings. And so, but then from that, moving into sort of a full-time role, yes, at the end of university, got offered the opportunity to go over to New York and work with the New York Red Bulls in their sort of pre-academy department. So at that time, academies in the US only started at sort of 15 years of age. And so what you then had was this pre-academy department that had players from 8 until 14 in it, that for New York spanned the entire tri-state area. So it was tryout based. You had to pass sort of a tryout stage to be in the program. But I actually thought it was a fantastic idea, because what it meant was, instead of having the best 20 10-year-olds in an academy setup, we had 80 10-year-olds in this pre-academy. So at every age category, you had sort of 80 to 100 players training at different centres around the tri-state area. And so by the time you got to 14, you'd been able to monitor this wider net of players for 4, 5, 6 years. And then when it's time to create academy teams, you really, know what you're getting, and you can then commit to those players for a period of whatever it is, 2, 4 years. And yeah, it was good to help them keep the net wide, but that's sort of the role I had in New York for a few years.
With this being your first step, well, if you're not including going to Newcastle or overseas, this being your first step across the pond to a different country, was it easier for you, considering the cultural and language links of the US?
Yeah, I think ultimately when you're going into somewhere where you're able to communicate, communication is the most important thing in coaching. And if you're unable to communicate your ideas in a sort of succinct and clear way, then you're struggling from the very beginning. And so going into an environment where it's the same language, largely, obviously there's some certain differences in terms of how Americans and the British Irish sort of, use terminologies, etc. But yeah, no, it was very good. It helped. I think also being Irish helped as well, coming from Ireland, because definitely there is, anyone who's went to the United States will know there is definitely a difference in how people from the UK, England are received in the United States to how people from Ireland, north or south, are received. I would definitely say it's a lot warmer if you're from an Irish background. And so I think that helped as well.
I think Irish is the one thing you hear Americans most frequently say. Like, my great-grandfather is a quarter Irish, and therefore that's the one I heard the most. They never really claimed many of the other nationalities in their ancestry.
No.
Not anything compared to Irish, nonetheless, and particularly around St. Patrick's Day. It came out all the time. You just want to drink, it's all right, that's fine. After that, how long was it before you've gone from Red Bulls to the Right to Dream Academy in Ghana?
Yeah, so we basically, they dovetailed with each other in a sense. I was working with New York, and I got, Tom Vernon, who people might know the name of. He's the owner of FC Northland now and owns the Right to Dream sort of academy, which is expanding across Africa. And Tom and I'd been to Right to Dream for a summer when I was in university. So we spent sort of 5 or 6 weeks there on what was really a prolonged job interview, because at the time I still had a year of university left. And Right to Dream were looking for a new head coach, basically. And I think I had been named Manchester United Grassroots Coach of the Year in England. Tom at the time was the head scout for Manchester United in Africa, and got in contact with me and flew me out to Ghana whilst I was, as I said, still at university. And we spent 5 or 6 weeks, and look, I had a great time. It opened my eyes to a footballing culture and environment at 20, 21 years old that I had never even conceived of. If you'd asked me at an 18-year-old, do you want to go and work in Africa? It wouldn't have even been on my radar. But after that period in Ghana, it really then became something of, okay, this could be a real opportunity here. And look, I went 5 weeks, great time, learned loads, but it was too early for me. I was 20, 21. I wasn't ready to be like the lead coach, the head coach of this academy that was growing exponentially. But Tom and I agreed to stay in contact, and we did. And then whilst I was in New York, I got a call from him, and Right to Dream basically had been brought on board as the consultants to set up the Craig Bellamy Foundation in Sierra Leone. And as part of that process, wanted to identify a technical director for the new academy in Sierra Leone. And Tom got in touch, and they were interested in me being that person. And part of it was, look, the American season was very much, I needed to make a decision at the end of the American season. And so whilst the academy in Sierra Leone wasn't going to be ready until maybe midway through the next year, I sort of needed to make a decision and needed a commitment from their side. Otherwise, I couldn't really walk away from what I was doing in New York, because I had a great position, great support structure there. But they decided, yes, we want to bring you on board. And actually, it might work great if you come and work for Right to Dream for 6 months, so that you really get used to the environment. And okay, Ghana's different than Sierra Leone, but there's a lot more similarities than America and Sierra Leone. So by coming here for 6 or 7 months, working with our players in our environment, you can really land in Freetown sort of 6, 7 months later and hit the ground running in Sierra Leone.
Now, I'm going to come back to follow this chronologically, but you've mentioned that as at 18, you would have had no idea that you'd have gone to Africa. And then since then, a large part of your career has been spent in African countries and holding some quite prominent roles. So I'll ask you this. Has your pathway followed what your initial coaching ambitions were?
Those ones when you were sort of 16, 17, 18, no. I think at that stage, there's a great saying is you can't comprehend what you don't know. There's this huge, vast world, universe of things that we just don't know. We don't even know we don't know them, and they're out there. And until you sort of walk into that room, or until you get hit in the face with these facts, these realities, you really have no conception of what they are, what they would mean for you. And so for me, as a young guy growing up in Ireland, I was always someone, people said I had itchy feet growing up, so people could see I would travel, and it's probably a toss of a coin coming from Ireland, whether you'll be someone who stays at home your entire life or someone who travels. But for me, it was, can you go and coach in England? Can you look at the American model and go and work in the United States? And, these are the cultures that we align with, we'd seen on TV, you grew up with, really. And so the idea to go to Africa wasn't something on my radar up until, as I said, I visited for the first time. And genuinely, I've always said, if you could bottle up one experience and give it to someone, would be that day, that night I arrived in Ghana when I was 20 years old, and just the drive out to the academy, which took like 90 minutes. If I could bottle that experience and give it to people just for them to have, that's the one, because it was life-changing, really.
What was life-changing about it?
I just think it's, as I said, until you are faced with these new realities and how people are and the passion people have and the warmth people have and the idea that the material things that I think we surround ourselves with in the West and consider quite important, when you go into these other environments, you just see all that sort of almost melt away a little bit, and that you can not just cope and survive, but actually, flourish with very little, and people's just drive and determination to not let what they don't have get in the way. And one of the big things I have in my career now, even working with players, is look, let's not spend time on what we or someone can't do. Let's worry about what they can do. And I think that's a big thing, is that, whether you're in Ireland or England or America, we spend a lot of time sitting around talking about what we're not able to do, when in fact, if we focused a bit more on what we can do, then we probably would move forward a lot quicker. And I just think going into that environment in Ghana for the first time was just like, everything was new. Everything was, and for me, it's just all of a sudden the world just, became 50 times bigger, 100 times bigger in the course of, a few moments.
Did you experience much culture shock, particularly going over there in your early 20s in Sierra Leone and Ghana? How far out your comfort zone did you feel, and did the people there help you adapt and make you feel welcome?
So I think yes is the answer to both of those. People were extremely welcoming and extremely sort of warm. I can say that genuinely about everywhere I've went, but definitely the culture shock. Ghana, because the academy was sort of structured, allowed you to sort of experience this new world in a somewhat semi-structured environment, which was great. And so you could go out into sort of the world, but then come back into almost that safe zone of the academy. When I went to Sierra Leone, the first day, it was just, I went for a week at first to round up some scouting, and then was going back to Ghana. But it was the first time I would ever set foot in Sierra Leone. And they had me in a hotel right on the main market street in Freetown. And I'm not joking you, this is, imagine the main street in your town. So pavements on either side, main road up the middle of it. And it was standing room only in this market. And the noise and the color and, just it was never quiet in the hotel room either, because you were sort of overlooking all of this. And for me, it really was that, it was a moment where I looked at it and went, oh, wow, have you bitten off more than you can chew here? Because it was an assault on the senses. It was so much. It was like almost the equivalent of someone bringing up 5 air horns and just letting them off in the room around you. It was so much that you couldn't comprehend what was going on around you. And genuinely, for the first few days, I did sort of think, is this the right thing? Am I ready for this? And I did consider going back and saying, look, this is too much. But whatever it was in me was sort of like, no, you've gambled on this, so let's see where it takes you. Let's sort of jump into the pool and see if we can swim here. So, but definitely there was that initial Sierra Leone. It's all action. It's full on. It's, to use Jurgen Klopp's term, it's a bit rock and roll in terms of the heavy metal environment. But yeah, you've got to go through that little bit of nervous and tension to find out what's on the other side.
Those thoughts you had in the hotel room, am I ready for this? That is normal. So a lot of coaches listening to this are going to consider going abroad, and they're always worried about what's it going to be like. And particularly with imposter syndrome, everyone else knows what they're doing apart from me. They've all got it figured out, but I don't. Every coach has these thoughts, these feelings, and these experiences. And I keep trying to say to people who are on the fence about going abroad is that do it, even if it goes wrong and you come home after a few days, it's not right, it's not worked out, you still learn a lot from it. You still learn something, you good and bad. You'll get an idea of what the world should be like according to you, and then you'll be stronger and better prepared for the next one. Obviously with the network, with LinkedIn, it's great to be able to talk to people and say, right, you've worked over here in this country, I'm coming out there, what's it like, what should I expect? Because there are some people that do try and pull the wool over your eyes, but I think now in 2022 we can all help each other, make life a lot easier for those who are maybe a bit apprehensive, maybe looking to go somewhere but are unsure of what they're expecting. That's why talking to people like yourself is invaluable, because you've been there and done it.
Yeah,
it's going to help people.
I think an important point for me anyway, maybe I do this differently than other people, but what you're talking about in terms of, so two things. One was something actually my sister, a bit of advice my older sister gave me a few years into my career, because these moments of, is it the right thing to do or not, don't just happen once, they happen multiple times, and you're sort of caught from safe harbor to sort of pushing off, to set sail again, to use that analogy. And so, it doesn't matter how many times you do it. Safe harbor is called that for a reason, that you feel comfortable where you are, and to take risks again is always challenging. But one of the things my sister told me a few years back was, look, you're not going to jail. You can always leave. You can always quit. If it doesn't. So, to take on what you're saying, if you take the opportunity and it's not right, you can always walk away. You can always resign. Now, depending on what level of the game you're in and what contracts you've signed up to, that might, have certain ways in which you do it. But definitely, no one is forcing you to stay anywhere. You're there because you want to be. And the moment you don't want to be there, you have that ability to walk away from it. And yeah, the other thing in terms of you were saying about like the network and finding out what places are like, it's interesting for me. I do very little research about a place before I move there. If I know someone who has lived there or been there, I will talk to that person directly and find out their view of it. And I obviously research football in the countries, but I don't go on and look at what is Bangladesh like to live in, what is Sierra Leone like to live in, because you find two things on the internet. One is tourist reviews, which is not living in a country, and the other is bad news. The other is bad news. And that's what the internet is. It's tourism and bad news and cat videos. That's sort of what's on the internet. And so for me, tourism and bad news is not life. And so when people say to me, was that country what you expected it to be? My genuine answer is I didn't expect it to be anything. It is what it is, and I'll experience it. And if it's not an environment I like, well, I can always leave. So that's sort of my approach to that, because if you go down the rabbit hole of searching places on the internet, you'll never move, you never go outside your house.
So this is why I'm trying to talk to people like yourself, get the podcast episodes and the articles out there, and build the pages on the website to get that honest review from people that have been there and done it. So if we take Q8, for example, What's good about it? Well, you've got a lot of good places to travel. You've got a very comfortable Western lifestyle. It's very warm. You can make a bit of money. What's bad? Well, some of the laws are quite restrictive. You can't eat bacon or drink alcohol, and the mosque will wake you up at 4 a.m, and you won't be able to develop much of a social life. So trying to paint the real picture of what a place is like from a coaching perspective and the perspective of someone who's going to live there, and say, these are the realities. If this is for you, apply. And because a lot of coaches, they are apprehensive about these places, and that's why it's really great to be able to talk to yourself, and you can help paint that picture for people that are considering going to some of these places. Now, on that, you spent, was it 5 years working for the Craig Bellamy Foundation?
Yeah, so in total it was 5 years. So the latter 2 years overlapped with my time as Sierra Leone national team coach. But yeah, in total I was in Sierra Leone for 5 years.
Now that to me just that doesn't compute. It's so amazing. So first off, there's not a lot of people in their early to mid 20s who've done 5 years of anything, right? Whether it's have a boyfriend, a girlfriend, own a pet, have a job. So what was it about Sierra Leone, about the project, that made you stay for 5 years?
I think part of it was, so basically those 5 years were over 2 contract periods. I initially signed up to do 2 years, and then we agreed an extension for a further 3 years. And it was personal growth for me. I went in initially as the technical director, so purely concerned with the football side. By the second contract, it became academy manager, where I was sort of responsible for the entire academy, operating under the CEO and the board. So in essence, I sort of had a vision for how everything could come together, almost like a sporting director role, if you will. And yeah, so part of it was personal growth in terms of the things that challenged me and helped me grow, both on the football pitch and also in the office, because ultimately we have to understand that if you want to be in the game at a high level for a long period of time, you actually do spend an awful lot of time in your office and behind a desk. You know, it's not just out on the grass all the time. And so it helped me grow personally. But also, you know, the thing that attracted me to Sierra Leone, to the opportunity, was it was a blank canvas, and it was an opportunity for me to take what I had in my head, my vision of football and how to develop young players, and put it into practice. And that, yes, I could take on ideas from other people, but at the end of the day, it was my call on whether we chose A or B. And for me, that was the reason I left New York. I was very comfortable in New York. I felt very supported and very, you know, sort of enabled by New York Red Bulls, fantastic club. But at the same time, you're working within their system. They give you freedom, but you're in their system. And that's fine. It's a great system. But I just thought, let me see if what I think about the game is right. If it's, or not that it's, if it's a right way, there's many right ways. There's 100, 200 different correct ways to go. But will my ideas work in reality? And so as we built the academy, as we grew it, as we moved players forward and created opportunities, that was the thing that sort of drove me to say, yeah, I want to do this. I want to keep doing this and keep pushing and giving these players the opportunities. And you look at them around the world. I think from our first, you know, we only ever had 30, 35 players at the academy, but already six or seven of them are playing pro around the world. And there's another 6 or 7 at college in the US. Some of them will go pro when they finish college. So it was that opportunity. Is what's going on in my head about this game relevant to the real world scenario?
It's amazing that at such a young age, you would give a significant portion of your life to a place where a lot of people can't even point to on a map. And if you said, I'm going to Sierra Leone, people say, oh, I think my dad drives one of those. So it's quite an impressive achievement to do that. And I'll ask you about how you transitioned as a national team manager in a second. But before that, I want to know, because you've achieved so much, because you've gone to so many interesting places, objectively, your career is cool. Right? There's a lot of cool things that you've done. Do you ever just kind of step outside of that and just pat yourself on the back for a moment and just go, yeah, this is pretty good, I've done well here? snap back into it and get the job done. But do you ever look around and think, I am really, really enjoying this, and I am very impressed with myself?
Yeah, I think for me, it's one of those things that if I were to stop now, I would have done something that I was told could not be done. You sort of mentioned at the start of the call the idea that, being a football coach wasn't the sort of thing, as a careers advisor. And I had that moment when I was 16, sitting with the careers advisor, what do you want to do? And I want to be a football coach. And the response came back, you mean like a PE teacher in a school? And with all the greatest respect, PE teaching is a very, it's a job that needs to be done, and there's some fantastic people doing it, but it wasn't what I wanted. And I still remember, I grew up a Newcastle United fan. It was, can I coach Newcastle United? Can I coach Northern Ireland? Can I do that? And at the time, you got to remember, Jose Mourinho hadn't come on the scene at that time. It was a few years later that he would, and I use him as an example because he was, for the popular culture, the first. He wasn't the first, but for popular culture, by all intents and purposes, he was the first non-player to make it to the big time, because most people wouldn't tell you that Arrigo Sacchi also took that route. But so before Mourinho, no one really had a context. And so to be told, no, it's not real, it's not possible to go and do that, is, for me was almost, someone, the gloves coming off and someone saying, putting a challenge to me. And so for me, what I've been able to do, for me is a justification of where we started and driving on when maybe people sort of thought, should you maybe, do this as a part-time career, but also go and get qualified to work in a bank or something like that. Whereas for me, it was, if I only do this, it's a bit like, I don't know if you watch those shows like Dragon's Den or Shark Tank, and the investors always say to the company owner, well, why haven't you invested? Why are you still working a full-time job and doing this part-time? If you want this company, your child of a company to succeed, you should throw everything into it. And so for me, that's really what I did with football. I threw everything into it, and it's sort of taken me to various places. And if I were to stop now, I think I could look and go, well, I achieved what people said wasn't possible. And so for that, I'm eternally grateful. But yeah, I definitely, it's funny. You think you strive for things in the game in terms of positions or maybe championships or trophies or results. It's amazing how quickly you move on from them, that you don't look back. When we won our first championship trophy as a coaching staff, you enjoy it that evening, and then the next morning you're going, right, let's plan for the next one. It's amazing that you move on so quickly to the next ambition, to the next mountain to be climbed.
Yeah, I found that success can often be underwhelming because you don't, particularly as a coach, you're so switched on and plugged into the moment. You're always thinking, and that sometimes you actually miss the opportunity to let go and to celebrate. And that's kind of the paradox of it, because if you did let go, you probably wouldn't have had the concentration or the drive to have actually succeeded in the first place. But let me ask you then, how do you go from Craig Bellamy Foundation to Sierra Leone men's national team coach at 27? That's from the outside looking in, that looks like one hell of a jump.
And it was. And I think, look, we all have to be honest with ourselves and appreciate that there are moments in our lives where we got fortunate. People don't like to use the term luck. People use that saying of, luck doesn't exist. It's, the people who work the hardest are the luckiest. And okay, that might be true, but luck does exist. Things happen, there's sliding doors moments. I was sat in Sierra Leone as the only A licensed coach in the country. I was on the ground, and the previous coach of the national team resigned with 3 World Cup qualifiers. I think they'd lost away to Tunisia or something like that. And the chances of them qualifying for the World Cup were like 5% or something like that. It's still mathematically possible, but a very small chance. And so he's resigned, and it became quite obvious that the Sierra Leone FA were going to appoint a domestic coach because it would save them a bit of money. They don't need flights, they don't need visa costs, all of the logistical costs of bringing a coach from Europe or outside the country were something they could cut away and just focus on the salary if they appointed a domestic coach. And so for me, when I heard that sort of through the grapevine of Sierra Leone football, my approach was, well, I need to get in a room and talk to these people. And obviously I'd been in the country for 3 years. We were the only professional residential academy in the country. So people knew who we were and knew who I was in the country because we had the best young players. We were dealing with youth international players, etc. And so to organize those meetings wasn't too difficult. And yeah, it was to go in and meet with the Ministry of Sport and the Sierra Leone FA sort of delegation and sort of pitch what I felt. And look, for them as well, it's low risk. What ended up being the offer was, look, we've got 3 games left. We have we've got the June international window against Tunisia and Cape Verde. And then you've got the September international window against Equatorial Guinea. And so in essence, they're employing you for 20 days if you want, because it's 2 camps. And so for them, it's low risk. And for me, I'm already in the country. And I can keep doing my job at the academy whilst also doing this. And so it was a right time, right place moment. If I was sat in Belfast applying for that job, it's not possible. I wouldn't have got it. And if they were at a moment where they were going to go for a foreign coach, you wouldn't have got it because you would have been competing with all of the foreign coaches. But in essence, it was a moment where the pool of applicants that they were seriously considered were all inside the borders of Sierra Leone. And I just happened to be the most qualified. And I ultimately went in and pitched, and they had little to lose to give it to a 27-year-old. And maybe, I don't know what process they went through. Maybe they also considered, if we do this, we'll get a bit of a media spin because it will pick up a bit of a media interest. So I don't know, maybe they looked at that as well. But for me, all that was important was that the answer was yes. And then it's like, and I got warned not to take it. There were so many people in Sierra Leone football said this team are unmanageable. There's a lot of party guys in there who just come back to visit their families and all of this, all of which I found not to be true once you were in the room, in the building. But I was warned. I don't think there was anyone in Sierra Leone football who advised I take that job. But for me, it was like, this might never come again. This opportunity might never come again. And you've got to go for it. And it just, it was the beginning of everything really in terms of my career and my pro career in the game.
So even if it doesn't work out, you got to take those opportunities because of what you would learn from it and what it might also lead to. You managed to get them, correct me if I'm wrong, to, was it 50th in the FIFA World Rankings?
Yeah, it's funny, like people can say what they want about the rankings and they're different now. It's probably very difficult to do that now because the rankings changed how they work. So we moved from like the mid 90s up to 50th, and we were 7th in Africa as well, 50th in the world and 7th in Africa. And it was funny at the time, there were these companies who would help you predict, if you played certain friendly games and all of this, how you could sort of almost manage the rankings. Didn't matter to us because we never played friendly games with Sierra Leone. We didn't have the budget for it. But you were able to almost predict where you were going to be in the world rankings. And we sort of knew we were going to move up that month. And we looked at it and we thought we're going to be 51st, which is the highest they'd ever been before, like 10 years previously. And we sort of thought, I think we're going to be 51st. I think we're going to tie with their record. But then when FIFA released the rankings and we were 50th, there was definitely a cheer went up in the office. It was like, look, the world rankings are what they are. It was a nice thing for the country. It was a great thing for the players. And just to show them that even though we weren't at the stage yet of qualifying for a major tournament, we were moving in the right direction. And, for players who travel all around the world to represent their country, having that sort of positive reinforcement is very valuable.
How did you achieve that with a bunch of party boys and no budget for friendlies?
I think this was the thing, was that you went in. I think, look, Sierra Leone as a culture is a very colourful culture. It's a beach country, so people, the term work hard, play hard gets used far too much. And when someone says work hard, play hard, you always envisage that they probably play a bit more than they should. But what I found was these guys, and you got to remember, we weren't dealing with amateurs here. We had guys playing for Celtic, for Norwich City, for Bolton, for AC Milan, for Elfsborg, we had players for in MLS. We had players in the top leagues all around the world earning significant amounts of money. And so they came back, and you know what? Yes, after we finished, we played the game. Yes, some of the guys went out and let off steam, and they enjoyed driving their big car to the beach bar or whatever. But it always happened after the game, and I don't know, like, it was so strange when I went into Sierra Leone. One of the first things I got praised for was that all of the players were moving from the team hotel to the training ground in the same bus, because apparently that wasn't normal. Normally players in Sierra Leone took their Hummers or their, Land Rovers from the hotel to the training ground. And I was like, but why would you do that? Surely that's just a case of discipline. That's a case of not being grey on that. It's black or white. It's you have to be on the team bus. If you're not on the team bus, you've been left behind and you're not training, and you'll be fine. But clearly that hadn't happened before. So we just went in and instilled boundaries. And then, look, we also spoke to the players as well. I think that was the thing. We went in and we knew, myself as 27, and because I'm 27, then everyone else on my coaching staff is young. I think the oldest person on our staff was maybe like 32. And so you cannot go in and take the dictatorial approach. You can't go in and act like Alex Ferguson. You have to go in and be, in the trenches with the players, and you got to talk to them, and you've got to ask them their opinion, and you've got to convince them of why you want to do something. And so again, that's very at odds with definitely with Sierra Leonean culture, where the younger person or the person who is further down the hierarchy is just expected to listen and do it. And so for us to go in and take that more altogether approach, I think got a lot of buy-in from the players. And it also helped. We managed to convince a few sort of foreign-born players of Sierra Leone ancestry to come and play for us. We had a few guys who'd played for England at youth level, opted to come and play for us. We had some guys who'd been born in the United States, opted to come and play for us. And so, yeah, that helped just expand the player pool.
You said that there were players, AC Milan, Celtic, Bolton, playing in some decent clubs. Now, you're 27 and your first big job as national team manager. You clearly did very, very well in the role. But were there times where you felt out of your depth? Did you feel much imposter syndrome?
We went in, I definitely think we knew the first training session was vitally important. And we just said, let's just go and do it. This is what we're going to do. We've been in this game a long time. Some of the guys I brought in with me were people who I sort of broke through at Red Bulls with, who'd all been in the youth department at Red Bulls. My goalkeeping coach, Andrew Sparks, who's now at Southampton, Tom Harris, who is now at North Carolina. And we just said, look, we know what we're doing. We know how to run a good training session. We've been used to working with really top, talented young players. So let's just go and run a training session. Let's go and see how, and let's make it fun. Let's make it enjoyable. And let's do all the things we've been doing for 10 years in the youth game. And it worked. The players enjoyed it. They weren't being asked to stand around and listen to lectures all day. And so I think that was really key, that we didn't sort of falter in that moment. But the other thing that was important was, because I'd ultimately been in the boss sort of category with the academy for several years at this stage, I'd had to make difficult calls then in terms of hiring and firing people, in terms of standing my ground in difficult moments. And so those moments also came with Sierra Leone. I still remember after we were just about to play Tunisia, our first game, we had a team meeting. So, the chalk talk type thing, show some videos, tactics boards the day before the game. This is what we're going to do against Tunisia. And we were changing something from what they'd normally done in terms of how the attacking lineup was set up. And three major players hung around afterwards. So you had Kai Kamara, who obviously has had a huge career. You had Tete Bangura, who just moved to the Turkish league for like 7 million euros. And you had Mohamed Bangura, who was playing for Celtic. Celtic had just signed for 5 million euros. And the three of them sort of came and asked to talk to us. And they were almost saying, look, why don't we just do what we've always done with the attack? And so me and my assistant Tom said, right, come, let's have a chat, close the door. And they got up on the tactics board and we gave them their 5 minutes to sort of show us on the tactics board what they thought we should do. And then what we did, we listened to them, we asked a couple of questions, and then I got back up on the tactics board and I walked them through maybe with a few extra layers that we would have done anyway with them prior to the game, but why we believed what we were proposing would work better in this game. And they listened to it and they went away and said, okay, yeah, the coaches know why they're doing what they're doing. They have that reason behind it. They're not just picking it out of thin air. And so they clearly went away out of that room. And I don't know the conversations that happened with other players, but I think it was probably, yeah, these guys are confident in what their approach is and they have reason and logic behind their approach. And so, but it would have been so easy in that moment with, 20, 25 million euros worth of talent stood in front of you saying, we think we should do this for you to fold. But we'd been in situations where we had to stand our ground before in different environments. So that was a transferable skill that we were able to stand our ground and say, no, this is why we're doing it. And yeah, we ended up it's still one of the biggest regrets is not winning that game because we were 1-0 up. We were then 2-1 up and Tunisia equalised in the 91st minute. To give them a draw, and it would have been our first ever win over Tunisia in history, and in front of 40,000 people at the Shaka Stevens Stadium. And it's a bit of a nightmare of a goal to concede. It's on YouTube. You can't quite imagine how you've conceded that goal in the 91st minute. Tired legs, tired minds, and it was frustrating. But we were the better team. We were the better team on the day. It worked, and so you come away, and the players now, they're going, okay, we've went from being also rans to almost beating Tunisia in the case of one week's work. So let's give these guys a chance.
So I think it's really important how you've talked about a dictatorial culture, and yet you've met the players on their level. You're a similar age, you've got similar ideas to them, and you're probably more able to relate to them as well. You've given them the time of day, you've allowed them their voice, you've given them some autonomy and some input, but you've also had the skill to back up and what you're saying and convince them. And I think that is excellent management, and that is very much a modern approach. And so that, I believe, will get a lot of buy-in from the players. Do you feel this role then prepared you better for Uganda and Rwanda because you'd already been through it, or was there more learning on the job when you went to those places? How similar were the positions and the cultures?
Yeah, I think what I found, you're always learning because everything is different. I'm a great one for analogies. I live in analogies. I think in pictures. And so there's another great saying I love that, no person ever walks through the same river twice because it's not the same river and it's not the same person. And so as you evolve and develop, you learn so much more about yourself and about the environment you're in. And so, but what you do understand is the role of a national team head coach is the same in some ways as being a club coach, but is also very different in some ways. And in many ways, it's an ambassadorial role. You represent a nation, in Uganda's case of like 44 million people. In Sierra Leone, like at the time, I genuinely felt that probably behind the president of the country, I was probably the most recognizable sort of non-playing person in the country, in terms of like an administrator or a sort of management person of the country. So you had the president of the country, and then, they were sticking me up on billboards and stuff. And, you're being interviewed on CNN and things like that. And you're being asked about stuff that's not just football. You're being asked about the Civil War. You're being asked about Ebola. When you're in Rwanda, you're being asked about the genocide that happened years earlier. And so really a national team role is an ambassadorial role as well. And that's not just in Africa. You look in England, Gareth Southgate is asked questions about racism. He's asked questions about things that are happening in the country because he's the national team coach of the country. So that is the one thing you probably take from each of them, and you learn more and more as you go, is how to fulfill that wider role better. That being an international coach is not just about football. It's about there's bigger things at play, because people want to talk to you, and they're not just going to talk to you about football.
So you see yourself on billboards. That must be an out-of-body experience. How do you cope with having the weight of a nation on your shoulders and being so easily recognizable? And probably the hopes and dreams of a lot of people are resting on the success of the football team. Does it affect your sleep? Does it affect your ability to relax and unwind?
No, I think for me, I take it very seriously. I think it's helped that we've been reasonably successful in most of the roles. Like, that's not to say every step's been a good one, but in all three positions, we improved results, we improved performances, we took the team forward. Now, if we'd went in and we're losing loads of games, then maybe it might have been different. You might have felt the pinch a little bit more, but we've generally improved the fortunes of the team, and so that gets you positive feedback from a lot of people. But for me, I'm a fan as well. I grew up hugely passionate about the game, and so I think you've got to try and engage with people as much as possible. You've got to listen to people as much as possible, but at the same time, you also learn to be a person who's not in those environments when you don't need to be. But there is definitely a big focus on it, and people wanting to talk to you and wanting to have a conversation and want to give you their opinion. And, but that's, it's a privilege to do that. I take great pride that I'm the person who gets to pick the team. Whether that team wins or loses, the fact is that it's my team sheet that gets handed to the referee every match day. And it's not the guys in the newspapers. It's not the guys on the sports channels. It's not the people down in the pubs and clubs. It's my team that goes out there. And for that, you're willing to, take a little bit of, having to organize your life in a certain way to have that privilege.
So between those three nations, have you had to adapt your tactics, your delivery, your man management style based on cultural things?
Yes, like in a sense, there's this thing that, it frustrates me, and I'm sure it frustrates people of the continent of Africa significantly, but people people don't talk about Europe as a place, but they talk about Africa as a place, and so, and so it's the idea of, people wouldn't ask the question of, do you have to make cultural adaptations coaching an English team or coaching a Slovakian team? They would assume that, of course, they're different. Of course, their histories are different. Of course, what they, how they react to situations are different. And that's exactly the same between Sierra Leone, Uganda, and Rwanda. All very different countries, all, just very different day-to-day life for people. And so, yeah, you've got to go in and you've got to understand. But that's why one of my big things is, I try to surround myself. I always make sure I have local staff on my staff. I've been in environments where they've said, look, bring everybody, bring the whole band. we'll pay for all the salaries. And I'm sort of having to hold the horses and go, look, maybe we don't need, a foreign, this position. If there's a really good goalkeeping coach in the country already, let's use him, because not only is it's their national team, but equally I need to lean on those people to understand the cultural impacts and the history of a country and what you can and can't do. And so I've got to learn from them. And again, it's that idea, because there's a hierarchical, system in place in a lot of these countries, going in and sort of sitting in an office and saying, guys, you need to tell me. And they're like, no, but you're the boss. And it's going, yeah, but I don't know everything. I was like, I've just landed here. You guys have lived here for 30, 40 years. You understand the culture. It's your culture. And so we've got to blend your culture with, the international expertise that we bring in from outside, but it always has to be embedded in your culture. So there's a learning curve in all of them. And it's just about embedding yourself in those cultures.
Were there ever times where the players or the staff would say something like, sorry, coach, we don't do it like that here? And you've had to almost adapt or change because you've not realised potentially there's a cultural faux pas or there's an expectation placed on you based on how things work in their society?
Yeah, definitely. There is that idea in all walks of life that this is how things are done here. Now, sometimes that's just historical, but other times it can be cultural. And so if it's historical, it's usually easier to change, because it's like, well, look, the reason I'm here is you wanted something to change. If you didn't want something to change, why am I here? And so if it's a historical thing that's just been, this is the way we've always done a certain thing, it's a little bit easier to change. And actually young players in nature are young, being in your mid 20s or late 20s is still young. You're still open to, change and doing something new. And so it's easier to do that. Culturally, it's sometimes. So for example, in Rwanda, the players, we had an incident at one point where some of the players, modern global culture was to have your hair in certain ways. You wanted to do hair in certain ways, but there was definitely some pushback that came from up on high that this doesn't represent the vision of Rwanda that we want the world to see. And so a few players decided that they should shave their heads because this longer, more Western hairstyle, if you will, wasn't sort of deemed appropriate. So yeah, there are those things that for me, I look at it and go, look, it's a hairstyle. But for other people, it can be quite sensitive. And so you have to appreciate that and sometimes just be like, it's not my job to tell you what's culturally appropriate or not. And you have to work within the system where it's appropriate.
No, I realise that we're getting to the end of the time. So I want to go to Lithuania to Bangladesh. So you've gone from national team roles to club team roles. What are some of the biggest differences for you as a manager and a coach?
I think in a club environment, you just get so much time with the players, which is fantastic. And to be honest, I did it the right way around. People will find that funny, but it's obviously not possible for the large majority of football coaches. But if you had the opportunity to first coach international football and then go into club football, which obviously isn't the normal way, but when you're with international football, you're so finite with your time. Like literally our session plans would have the water breaks timed on them. And then when I went into the club environment, this was almost like a point of humor. They're like, why are we timing the water breaks? And it's like going, because I'm not having the players out here any longer than possible. And so what happened when we went into the club environment was the players actually really appreciated that we weren't wasting their time. The players were spending less time at the training ground because we were so almost military in our approach to timekeeping and in our approach to how we did things. We didn't waste time. And you learn that in the international environment because you have your players for like 5 or 6 days before a game. So you have to be. And so I think in the club environment, that was really appreciated. You have so much more time with your players to do individual work, to get them in the classroom, to sit them down. They're also in a different frame of mind because your players are coming in every day from their families. they're coming in from, their own house, their own bed. They've dropped the kids off at school. They're coming to training. Whereas in an international environment, you're in a team hotel. You're with each other 24/7. And so that is a very artificial environment that has an impact on player stress levels. It has an impact on their sleep, all of these things. And so that was a big change. But yeah, the big challenge in club football is you have so little time. You've got so much time with the players, but you've got so little time in terms of the new side of football, shall I call it, the analysis, the sports science, etc. So in an international game, you've got 3 weeks in the office with your staff where you can prepare to play Tunisia or to play the Ivory Coast, and you can focus in on the minute detail of how can we narrow the gap in order to beat these teams. Whereas in a club environment, you're playing Tuesday, Saturday, Wednesday, Sunday, and it's, your analysts are having to work 2 or 3 games ahead of themselves. And equally, the level of detail you go into has to be less. You simply cannot go into the same detail in a club environment as you are able to in the national team environment, just because you've got so much more time with international. So yeah, more time with players, but less time to prepare on the information side of it in a club environment.
Now, we get a few jobs come up in Bangladesh and Lithuania occasionally. What are the football landscapes like in these countries? Now, I'm guessing that they, to me, on the surface, having not been to either of them, they seem poles apart.
Yeah, so Lithuania is obviously an environment that has changed a bit in recent years. But what was really interesting in Lithuania was that because it is a lower income country, most people in Lithuania at the time I was there, if you were like working in a bank or you were working in a supermarket or a teacher or something like that, a standard job, let's say, you might have been bringing in 500 or 600 euros a month before tax in Lithuania, and that allowed you to live a normal life, paid the groceries, kept the electricity on, etc. But what that then meant was footballers in the country, yes, earned at a higher level than the general populace, but that higher level was like 1,000 euros a month. And so it's always quite interesting, because then when you're going to try and sign players, you're trying to sign, we had players from Spain, from Brazil, from Nigeria, and from Georgia, and you're going to go and negotiate with these players, and not so much the players, but more their agents. And they're sort of like, they're really eager to come and play in Lithuania because it's Europe. And it's like, yeah, we want to play in Europe. It's a springboard league. If we do that well there, we might move to another league around Europe, which is also how we sold it. But then you're saying, right, we can offer you 1,000 euros a month on an apartment to play in the Lithuanian Premier League. And the amount of, I think players, if left alone, probably would agree to it more often because they can see the potential. But then agents and whatnot get involved. And, an agent's looking and going, well, 5% of 1,000 euros isn't very much. But then you're sort of going, yeah, but you'll live like a king in Lithuania on this. And so that was the challenge, whereas Bangladesh was completely different. Bangladesh is obviously, a very much a developing nation. Dhaka is the most populated city in the world per square, so most densely populated city in the world. And that has an impact on your lifestyle there and how you move. But equally, you then have this league that people would go, oh, the Bangladesh Premier League, and they might roll their eyes a little bit at it. But you've got players on anything, like even the normal Bangladeshi player is on a few $1,000s a month, right up to, like at my time, the top earning player in the league for one of our rivals was reported to be on around $25,000 a month, to play in the Bangladeshi Premier League. So people would look at it and go, oh, the Bangladesh League, but you're sort of going, well, our annual salary budget was like over $500,000. And, you've got players who you're signing for several $1,000s a month to come and play in that league. And so all of a sudden you're going, well, which is the more professional league? Is it Lithuania that's, paying 500, 1,000, 1,200 euros a month? Or is it the Bangladeshi league where, foreign players, good, and even Bangladeshi players can earn, really good money in the league? So yeah, that's why I always think people look around the world and think that there's this bias that's been developed over the years that the only place that football is serious is in Western Europe. And it's just not true. It's just not true. You know, you can have an exceptional career in various parts of the world, and you can have, you know, the passion for the game is huge in these different regions of the world. So, yeah, Western Europe is not the be all and end all of the pro game.
So, like I said earlier, pretty much every experience you've had could be worth a book in its own right. And I could talk to you all day, but I'm conscious of your time, so I'm going to finish up with two questions about the practicalities of coaching abroad. First one is, you've managed to get an A license and a pro license while being able to essentially be a globetrotter, go to all these different places. How did you manage to keep going through the license pathway while working in different countries?
It's a really easy answer. I spent an incredible amount of money to do it. Like to do your pro license, you've got to be in country. I was in Rwanda when I was doing my pro license. And so you've got to turn up every month. You might get one. There was one session I didn't turn up for, pre-agreed, which was presenting your match analysis that you'd done. And so what I did, though, was we set the cameras up and I recorded our analysis session with the national team and submitted it. And so I said we were playing Libya in a World Cup qualifier. And so game day -1, where we're doing our match preparation and we're looking at very key details of Libya for sort of 20 minutes. And we recorded it and sent it in, and UEFA were happy and the Irish FA were happy to accept that. But that was the only time. So if you're thinking the pro license is 18 months, you've got the week at the start, the week at the end, and basically in 12 of those 18 months, you need to be in Belfast for 1 or 2 day get-togethers. I remember once flying from Rwanda to Dublin Airport, landing on the Friday night, driving up to Belfast, going to an analysis, sort of learning how to use the analysis software we were being given on the Saturday from sort of 9 till 5. And then that night driving back to Dublin Airport and flying back to Rwanda. So I was in Ireland for 18 hours to turn up for the day. So but again, I was incredibly fortunate. I was coaching a national team that were, paying me a national team salary. That meant I was able to spend, on transatlantic or transcontinental flights every month. If I was coaching at a youth academy somewhere, I know you just wouldn't be able to do it. You couldn't afford it. So again, we talk about a bit of luck and a bit of fortune along the way. Again, I was very fortunate to be in a role that enabled me to do my pro license, but it cost a lot of money.
Oh, I can imagine. I've seen some coaches and courses that are flying in from all sorts of places. Well, I complain just about the petrol.
Yeah, but I come back to the thing I said earlier. It's like, are you all in or are you not? And for me, it was like, it's that, again, you only know how far you can go if you're willing to push it, if you're willing to go too far. And yeah, so for me, it was like, we've went along this path and we've got to see it through now. And, whatever that costs, let's see what is possible in this career, in this life. And at the end of it, we can debate and dissect whether it was worth it or not.
And as someone that's worked in lots of different places and been all around the world, coaching abroad is difficult in the sense that you're away from your family, you're away from comfort zone. It's hard to maintain relationships and friendships. So what's been maybe one of the hardest things for you to deal with as a coach that has spent predominantly most of your time abroad?
I think one of the hard things, which I actually set around sort of resolving this last year, is where are you from? Where is home? Now, home is obviously Ireland, but I left Ireland very young. I was 18. And so I've been away from home for coming up on 20 years now. So yes, my family are there and it will always be home in that sense, but it's not where I'm from. I've spent more of my life outside of Ireland than in it. So it's, I go back to Belfast and Lisburn and I love being there. I love catching up with friends, but at the same time, their lived experience is not mine. and so we share an historical and a family bond, but we don't really share a lived experience bond. And actually, the people you're closest to in life are the people you have a lived experience with. Is my finding, is sort of what I found over the years. And so what that meant then was anytime you leave a position or leave a job, you're sort of sat in an airplane and you're thinking, well, I'm sort of technically homeless because where am I going now? I need to go and like rent an apartment or something. And so I sort of corrected that this year by buying my own house in the south of Spain to say this is home. This is where, we're not going to rent it out. We're not going to do anything. We're going to set it up so that whether I'm on holiday or whether I'm, it's where my roots can be. And I think that helps, knowing that you've always got somewhere to go back to. Because when you don't have that, it can be a bit stressful. But yeah, I think that's the thing, is that you go down a path that is different. If you're moving around the world, people don't have the reference points you have. So I might tell someone a story about something that happened in Ghana or Sierra Leone whilst we're sat in, a restaurant in Belfast. But you sort of know that they do not have a reference for what you're talking about because it's so outside of the world that they live in. And that's okay, but it's just a reality of life.
They kind of gloss over and look at you like you're an alien, don't they? What is this?
Well, I think sometimes what you find is conversations with family and friends, if it's about what you do, can feel very similar to conversations with someone you don't know, a supporter. And so actually for me, yes, if people want to talk about football, I'm more than happy to, because people are interested. But for me, I try my best to, read and understand other things in the world so that what we're talking about isn't football. Because, yeah, it can be very quickly become, a supporter talking to you. And that's not really it's not a nice feeling, I think, when it's someone you've known your entire life.
Before you go, would you like to tell us what is mind, body, and ball?
So mind, body, and ball is something we're sort of just starting to sort of get off the ground a little bit. So it's sort of a company we've set up for me personally and some guys I'm working with, that very much it's the idea of that personal attention that either coaches or players might need. Because I think in the modern world, it's very difficult to get that personalized attention in terms of how do you succeed as an individual in a team environment. And so the idea that it can be supplementary, whether it's a coach, whether it's a player who you work with via video chats like this, maybe in person, and for them to understand what can they do to maximize themselves in a technical or tactical aspect, the ball, how they can physically be better, because I've yet to meet a player who can't physically be better. I've not worked with Cristiano Ronaldo on for long, is the importance of our mind and also emotionally in football, how that impacts us. But it has a huge impact. It has a huge impact how what's going on, between our ears. And, we're at the training ground for a few hours a day, but what's going on the rest of our lives, and how do we incorporate that to help us be a successful person, really? Yeah, so that's something we've not really, it's out there. We haven't pushed it too much because we want to make sure it's right. But the idea is that personal tailored attention that an individual can utilize to sort of maximize themselves in whatever they're doing, whether it's as a player, whether it's as a coach. And to be honest, who knows down the line, it might even spread its wings beyond the sporting context.
Well, thank you very, very much for coming on. You're someone that I've wanted to talk to for years, not just as a podcast guest, but someone that I've wanted to listen to and learn from. Your journey is fascinating. You've done some incredible things along the way. And like I've said before, it's great to be able to watch and to almost live vicariously through yourself and to see the great things you do. And you are a wonderful example for coaches who want to live and work abroad. Thank you for being so candid. Thank you for sharing your insight, and thank you for giving your time for us to listen to your stories.
No, thank you very much. It's been good to sort of take a walk down memory lane on a few things.
Thoroughly enjoyable to talk to Johnny and listen to his exciting and inspirational career. I love learning about the successes of all the great coaches out there, exploring the world and becoming better coaches, achieving wonderful things. Remember, for opportunities abroad, we've got you covered on the British Football Coaches Network. Sign up today to access the jobs board and see what opportunities await you. See you next time.